My name is Brittany, am 32 years old, and am standing outside my childhood home in suburban Connecticut with my bags packed while my family refuses to even look at me through the window. 24 hours ago, I was the devoted sister who spent months planning my younger sister's engagement party down to every last detail. Now, am accused of spiking the drinks and starting a fight that turned the whole celebration into a disaster. Here's the thing though, I wasn't even at the party when it happened. I have hospital records, security footage, and witnesses proving I was 25 minutes away, helping my best friend with her daughter's broken arm. But my parents slammed the door in my face anyway. My phone just buzzed with an anonymous text and a photo attachment that supposedly proves I did it. Before I tell you how I ended up here, I need to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments, because this story gets wild and I want to know how far this kind of family drama reaches. If you've ever been accused of something you didn't do, hit that like button right now, and subscribe because you're going to want to hear how this twisted setup unfolded and who was really behind it. Trust me, the truth is going to shock you as much as it shocked me. Now, let me take you back to where this nightmare actually started. Growing up, my sister Haley and I had the kind of relationship where everyone constantly compared us, and I always came up short. She was 28 now, 4 years younger than me, and she'd always been the golden child. Mom would show off Haley's report cards to the neighbors while quietly tucking mine in a drawer. Dad would beam with pride at Haley's corporate job promotions while asking me if my graphic design work was still just freelance stuff. Despite all of it, I genuinely loved my sister. Maybe that makes me sound naive, but Haley never asked to be put on a pedestal. She'd actually defend me sometimes when Mom got particularly critical. When she called 3 months ago to tell me Graham had proposed, I screamed with joy so loud my neighbors probably thought someone was being attacked. Graham was 31, came from old money in Boston, and treated Haley like she hung the moon. I was genuinely thrilled for her. The engagement party planning started immediately because Graham's mother Constance had opinions about everything and wanted the celebration to happen quickly. Constance was 64, wore pearls like they were casual, everyday accessories, and had a way of looking at our family like we were a science experiment she found mildly disappointing. I volunteered to handle the decorations and create a photo slideshow because that's what big sisters do. I spent hundreds of dollars of my own money buying supplies in the exact shade of blush pink Haley wanted. I drove to 3 different florists to find the specific peonies she'd seen in some wedding magazine. I worked with the caterer she'd chosen, a guy named Julian who charged premium prices but came highly recommended by Constance's social circle. My mother, Patricia, who was 58 and desperately wanted to impress Graham's family, kept thanking me for taking so much pressure off her shoulders. My father, Roger, 61 and recently retired, mostly stayed out of the planning but would occasionally pat my shoulder and say I was being a good sister. The party was going to be at my parents' house because they had a large backyard and Haley wanted something intimate rather than a hotel ballroom. We rented a massive white tent, strung up hundreds of fairy lights, and created a drink station with a beautiful vintage punch bowl my mother had borrowed from her sister. The guest list hit 75 people, including Graham's colleagues from his law firm and several family friends from his parents' country club. Everything had to be absolutely flawless, because Constance had made it clear that this party would set the tone for how Graham's social circle viewed Haley. The pressure was intense, but I kept telling myself it was worth it to see my sister happy. My older brother Derek was 35 and had always been the closest to me growing up, but lately had been distant, wrapped up in his relationship with his girlfriend Jasmine and climbing the corporate ladder at his finance job. Still, he promised to be there and help however he could. The day before the party, I took off work to help with final preparations. I worked as a graphic designer at a small but successful firm, and while my job was stable and I was good at what I did, it wasn't glamorous like Haley's position as a marketing director for a pharmaceutical company. I arrived at my parents' house at 7 in the morning and worked straight through until early evening, making sure every decoration was perfect and every detail matched Haley's vision. When Haley arrived with Graham around 4 that afternoon, She seemed stressed and kept snapping at small things. She criticized the angle of one of the photo displays and said the ribbon on the gift table looked crooked. I brushed it off as wedding stress because planning a wedding while working full-time would make anyone irritable. Graham was his usual charming self, though I noticed he seemed distracted by his phone and kept stepping away to take calls. That evening, I met Graham's sister Sloane for the first time, and something about her immediately put me on edge. She was 33, worked in theater production, and had this way of looking around our parents' house like she was cataloging everything to gossip about later. She made subtle digs about the neighborhood being quaint and asked if we'd always lived in such a small house, even though our house was perfectly nice and my parents had worked hard to afford it. I watched her whisper to Constance multiple times throughout the evening, and both of them kept glancing in my direction. It gave me a weird feeling in my stomach, but I told myself I was being paranoid and oversensitive. The evening ended with Haley pulling me aside and hugging me tight, thanking me for all the work I'd put into making her party perfect. She told me I was her favorite person in the world and she didn't know what she'd do without me. I drove home that night feeling proud and useful, excited to see everything come together the next day. I had no idea I was about to walk into a carefully constructed trap that would destroy my entire family in less than 24 hours. I arrived at my parents' house at 8 in the morning on the day of the party, and the backyard looked absolutely magical. The tent glowed white in the morning sun. The flowers were fresh and vibrant, and the tables were set with elegant simplicity. I felt this surge of pride looking at everything we'd accomplished. The caterers arrived right on schedule, and Julian complimented the setup while his team started arranging the food stations. The florists came to do final touches on the centerpieces, and everything seemed to be falling perfectly into place. Haley appeared around 10 wearing a cream-colored dress that made her look absolutely radiant, and we had this beautiful moment of just being sisters before the chaos of the party. She held my hands and told me again how grateful she was, and I felt like maybe all those years of being compared didn't matter because we had this bond that was real and solid. Graham arrived with his family around 11:30, and that's when the energy shifted. His parents, Pierce and Constance, came in like they were inspecting a property they were considering purchasing. Pierce was 66, had kind eyes, and genuinely complimented how beautiful everything looked. Constance immediately started finding small problems, pointing out that one of the tent poles was slightly crooked and suggesting the ice sculpture we'd rented wasn't quite the right size. My mother started getting flustered trying to address every critique, and I jumped in to handle things so she wouldn't have a panic attack before guests even arrived. Graham's sister Sloane was there with their cousin Nash, who was 36 and worked in commercial real estate. Nash had this overly familiar way of talking to me that made me uncomfortable, standing too close and making comments about how I must work out because I looked good. I politely extracted myself from that conversation as quickly as possible. Guests started arriving at 2 in the afternoon, and I slipped into hostess mode naturally because I'd basically been training for this role my entire life. I made sure elderly guests had chairs in the shade, directed people to the drink station, and kept the conversation flowing when awkward silences threatened. I noticed Sloane hovering near the drink station multiple times, which struck me as odd because she'd been pretty antisocial up until that point. Derek arrived with Jasmine around 2:30, and we had a brief moment of connection where he thanked me for doing so much for the family. But even then, he seemed distracted and kept checking his phone, which wasn't like him. The toast started around 3:30, and I'd prepared a heartfelt speech about Haley that made several people tear up. I talked about watching my little sister grow into this amazing woman and how Graham was lucky to have her. While I was speaking, I noticed Sloane filming me on her phone, which seemed weird, but I figured maybe she was just documenting the day. After the toasts, Nash cornered me near the bar and made another inappropriate comment about us getting drinks together sometime, just the two of us. I smiled politely and told him I needed to check on the kitchen, then escaped as fast as I could without making a scene. At exactly 4:15 in the afternoon, my phone rang with a call from my best friend Lacey, and her voice was pure panic. Lacey was 33, had been my closest friend since college, and I'd never heard her sound so terrified. Her 7-year-old daughter Emma had fallen at the playground, and Lacey thought her arm might be broken because Emma was screaming in pain and couldn't move it. Lacey's husband was out of town for work, and she was alone at the emergency room, absolutely losing her mind. I didn't even hesitate. I found Haley immediately and told her I had an emergency and needed to leave. She looked annoyed and asked if it could wait until after the party ended, which was scheduled for 6. I explained that a child was hurt and my friend needed me, and Haley's face softened. She told me to go and thanked me again for everything I'd done. I found my parents, explained the situation, and they were completely understanding. My mother even hugged me and told me to drive safely. I grabbed my purse and left at 4:20, driving straight to County General Hospital, which was 25 minutes away. I stayed with Lacey and Emma for the next 3 hours while doctors examined Emma's arm, took x-rays, and eventually confirmed it was fractured and needed a cast. Emma was terrified and crying, and I helped distract her by playing games on my phone and telling her stories. Lacey was a mess of guilt and worry, and I stayed because that's what friends do when someone needs you. It wasn't until around 8 at night, when Emma was finally calm with her bright pink cast and we were heading home, that I finally pulled out my phone to check messages. My stomach dropped when I saw 37 missed calls and what felt like 100 text messages. Every single one was from family members. My mother, my father, Derek, even cousins I barely talked to. And every message was furious. They called me selfish, destructive, cruel, manipulative. My mother's last text was the one that made my hands shake so badly I almost dropped my phone. It just said, "Don't bother coming home and you've done enough damage." I tried calling everyone back immediately, but no one answered. Not my mother, not my father, not Haley, not Derek. Every call went to voicemail or rang endlessly. My mind was racing, trying to understand what could possibly have happened in the 4 hours I was gone. Had someone gotten hurt? Had there been an accident? Finally, Derek answered his phone, but his voice was ice cold in a way I'd never heard before. He said he couldn't believe I would do this and that Haley was absolutely devastated. When I asked what he was talking about, he said stop lying because multiple people saw me. I told him I'd been at the hospital the entire time, that I could prove it, but he just said I needed to stop making excuses and hung up on me. I sat in my car outside Lacey's house feeling like I was having a nightmare, except I was definitely awake, and this was definitely real. Something terrible had happened at that party, and somehow everyone believed I was responsible for it. I drove to my parents' house with my heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. Lacey offered to come with me, but I told her to stay with Emma, and that I'd call her once I figured out what was going on. The drive felt endless even though it only took about 20 minutes. My mind kept spinning through possibilities. Maybe someone had gotten into an argument and blamed me. Maybe something had been stolen. Maybe the decorations had fallen and hurt someone. Nothing made sense because I hadn't been there, and surely once I explained that and showed them the hospital records, everything would be fine. I kept telling myself this was just a misunderstanding that would get cleared up quickly. I had no idea I was driving straight into a nightmare that would last for weeks. When I pulled up to my parents' house, all the party decorations were still up, but the lights were off except for the porch light. Both my parents' cars were in the driveway, so I knew they were home. I walked up to the front door and knocked, and when my mother opened it, the look on her face made me take a step backward. Pure disgust. That's the only way to describe it. She looked at me like I was something rotten shed found in the back of the refrigerator. My father appeared behind her, and he wouldn't even meet my eyes. I started asking what happened, telling them I'd been at the hospital, begging them to explain what I supposedly did. My mother's voice was cold and flat when she told me I'd spiked the punch with vodka and that multiple guests had gotten sick. I literally laughed because it was so absurd, but the laugh died in my throat when I realized they were serious. I told them again that I'd left at 4:20 and had been at County General Hospital until after 8. I hadn't been anywhere near the party when whatever happened occurred. My mother said Haley saw me near the drinks right before people started getting ill. My father added that Graham's boss had gotten sick and made a scene, and that Graham's entire family was humiliated. I felt like I was in some alternate reality where words had stopped making sense. I kept explaining the timeline, pulling out my phone to show the call from Lacey, offering to show them hospital check-in records. My mother just said that Lacey would obviously lie for me and that I'd always been jealous of Haley. That accusation hit me like a physical blow. Jealous? I'd spent hundreds of dollars and countless hours making that party perfect. I'd given a toast, celebrating her. I'd been nothing but supportive. My father pulled out his phone and showed me a photo that made my blood run cold. It was a picture of someone who looked exactly like me, standing near the drink station. The person was wearing my dress, the distinctive floral pattern I'd bought specifically for this party. They had my hair, long and auburn and styled in the same loose waves I'd worn, but the face was partially turned away from the camera, obscured by the angle. The timestamp on the photo showed 4:45 in the afternoon. I stared at it, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. I told them it wasn't possible, that I was already at the hospital by then. I suggested the photo might be from earlier in the party, but my father said the metadata showed 4:45 and that I needed to stop insulting their intelligence by lying. I mentioned that Sloane had been acting strangely around the drinks earlier, and that's when my mother lost it completely. She said I was unbelievable, that now I was trying to blame Graham's sister just to save myself, and that I'd always had a problem taking responsibility for my actions. Derek pulled up in his car at that moment, and I felt a surge of hope because Derek had always been on my side. But when he got out and walked up to join my parents on the porch, his face showed the same cold disappointment. He said he'd seen me acting nervous near the drinks before I supposedly left, and that my behavior had been suspicious. I realized in that moment that my entire family had collectively decided I was guilty, and nothing I said was going to change their minds. My father delivered the final blow by telling me I wasn't welcome at family events until I apologized properly to Haley and Graham's family. My mother added that I needed to take responsibility for what I'd done and stop playing the victim. Then they closed the door in my face while I was still standing there trying to find words that wouldn't come. I woke up the next morning to discover I'd been blocked by my entire family on every social media platform: Facebook, Instagram, even LinkedIn. It was like I'd been systematically erased from their digital lives overnight. My cousin Shelby, who was 26 and loved drama, had posted something vague about family members who can't handle other people's happiness. The comments section was filled with extended family members I'd known my whole life, all taking shots at me without using my name. My Aunt Darlene, who was 53 and had always been judgmental, commented that some people have jealousy like a disease. My Uncle Louis, who was 59, added that watching someone self-destruct was always sad. I sat in my apartment reading through dozens of comments from relatives and family friends, all of them convinced I was some kind of monster. The urge to defend myself was overwhelming, but I knew anything I posted would just be used as evidence of my guilt or twisted into something worse. Then I got a private message from Wendy, a family friend who was 48 and had known me since I was a child. She babysat me and Haley when we were little. Her message said she was very disappointed in me and had expected better. I wrote back immediately, explaining the timeline and offering to send her photos of the hospital check-in with timestamps. She responded that photos could be taken any time and asked why I was still lying, instead of just apologizing and moving forward. That's when I realized this wasn't just about my immediate family anymore. The story had spread through our entire social circle, and I'd been convicted in the court of public opinion without any chance to defend myself. Everyone had decided I was guilty, and any evidence to the contrary was either fake or irrelevant. When I went to work on Monday, I tried to act normal and focus on my design projects, but everything felt surreal. My boss, Todd, who was 45 and had always been supportive of me, called me into his office around noon. He looked uncomfortable as he explained that someone had sent an email to the company's general inbox claiming I had substance abuse issues and a history of erratic behavior. The email was detailed and professional sounding, mentioning the engagement party incident as an example of my instability. Todd knew me well enough to be skeptical, but he said he had to address it officially because it came through company channels. I showed him my hospital alibi and had Lacey write a statement confirming everything. Todd accepted my explanation and said he believed me, but he warned me that personal drama was starting to affect my professional image and I needed to handle it quickly. The idea that someone had contacted my workplace made me feel physically sick. Who would do that? And how did they even know where I worked? My coworker Iris, who was 29 and had been friendly with me for the past year, started avoiding me. I realized she'd been invited to the engagement party through some mutual connection, and she'd obviously heard the story. She wouldn't make eye contact with me in meetings and stopped joining me for lunch. I became paranoid that Graham's family had connections everywhere and were systematically destroying my reputation. I wasn't sleeping, barely eating, and jumped every time my phone made a sound. 4 days after the party, I received a text message from Haley, and my hands shook as I opened it. It was long, and every word felt like a knife. Haley described how humiliating the aftermath of the party had been, how Graham's elderly grandmother had gotten so sick she'd needed to go to the hospital for dehydration. She wrote about Graham's boss leaving early after becoming violently ill, insulted by what he perceived as a prank. She said Constance had pulled Graham aside and told him she had serious concerns about marrying into our family. The wedding plans were now strained because Graham's entire family was questioning whether the marriage was a good idea. Then came the part that destroyed me. Haley wrote that she'd defended me our whole lives, standing up for me when Mom criticized me, making excuses when I fell short, always believing the best about me. She said I'd obviously been jealous that she'd found someone and was finally happy. She said I couldn't stand that she was the center of attention for once. She said Graham had almost called off the engagement because of what he'd done. I read that message over and over until I'd memorized every cruel word. I tried calling Haley immediately, but she'd blocked my number. I sent her an email begging her to meet me in person so I could explain, but the email bounced back because she'd blocked that too. In desperation, I wrote a physical letter by hand, explaining everything that had happened, including the timeline and my evidence. I mailed it to her apartment and waited anxiously for a response. A week later, the letter came back marked "Return to sender," unopened. My sister had completely cut me off, and there was no way to reach her. I'd lost my entire family in the span of a few days, all because someone had framed me for something I didn't do, and the worst part was I had no idea who or why. Lacey was the only person who believed me unconditionally, and I honestly don't know how I would have survived those weeks without her. We met for coffee at a quiet place across town where I was unlikely to run into anyone I knew. I broke down completely, crying so hard the other customers started staring. Lacey held my hand and said firmly that someone had set me up deliberately, that this wasn't some random misunderstanding. We spread out everything I had on the coffee shop table like we were detectives in a crime show. Hospital records showing I'd checked in at 4:28 in the afternoon. Security footage from the hospital showing me in the waiting room. The timeline of when people at the party started getting sick, which was around 4:50 according to the texts my family had sent. Lacey pointed out that this was airtight proof I couldn't have been in two places at once, and someone must have deliberately impersonated me. We started making a list of people who would benefit from destroying my relationship with my family. I told Lacey about Sloane's strange behavior, how she'd been hovering around the drink station, and how she'd filmed me during my toast. I also mentioned Nash and his inappropriate behavior, and how he might have been angry that I rejected his advances. Lacey suggested we needed to get a copy of that photo my parents had shown me so we could analyze it properly. But when she tried calling my mother as a neutral third party, Patricia refused to speak with her and called her an enabler. We were stuck without access to the main piece of evidence against me. That's when Lacey said something that changed everything. She told me that in cases like this, the person who had the most to gain was usually the person responsible, and we needed to think about who benefited most from Haley being isolated from her family. 2 days later, I got an unexpected phone call from Graham's cousin Nash, and my first instinct was to hang up. I remembered his creepy behavior at the party and assumed he was calling to harass me, but something in his voice made me pause. He said we needed to talk about what happened at the party and that he had information I needed to hear. We agreed to meet at a neutral coffee shop, and I brought Lacey with me for safety. Nash showed up alone, looking uncomfortable and guilty. He told me he'd seen Sloane changing clothes in her car before the party started, which struck him as odd because she'd already been dressed when she arrived. He'd approached her car to ask if she needed help, and she'd been secretive and told him to go away. He said she'd had a garment bag and seemed agitated when he asked about it. Nash explained that Sloane had been furious when Graham announced his engagement to Haley. Apparently, Sloane had a longtime friend named Margot, who was 32, and Sloane had been pushing Graham to date Margot for years. She'd arranged dates, invited Margot to family events, and basically tried to orchestrate their relationship. When Graham met Haley and chose her instead, Sloane felt personally betrayed. Nash said his cousin was vindictive and that he'd watched her ruin people before when they got in her way. He offered to help me prove what really happened, but he warned me that Sloane was calculating and careful, so getting proof would be difficult. I asked him why he was helping me, expecting him to make another inappropriate advance. Instead, he looked genuinely ashamed and said he felt guilty about how Head behaved at the party and wanted to make amends. He also admitted Head never liked how Sloane operated and was tired of watching her manipulate people. Lacey, Nash, and I met the next day to piece together a theory about what had actually happened. We figured out that Sloane must have bought or made a dress identical to mine, possibly from seeing photos of me posted online before the party. She'd worn a wig styled exactly like my hair. She'd waited for me to leave the party, then changed into her costume in her car. She'd tampered with the drinks, making sure multiple witnesses saw someone who looked like me acting suspiciously. She'd taken a photo of herself disguised as me and made sure it had the right timestamp. Then She'd disappeared, changed back into her regular clothes, and returned to the party before anyone noticed she'd been gone. The whole plan was designed to destroy Haley's relationship with our family, making her vulnerable and isolated. If Haley felt cut off from her support system, she might be more likely to break the engagement, or at minimum, Graham's family would demand she distance herself from her toxic family. Nash mentioned that Sloane worked in theater production and was skilled with costumes, wigs, and stage makeup. That detail made everything click into place. She had the skills to pull off an impersonation like this. We needed proof, though. We needed to find the original dress, the wig, and ideally, witnesses who'd seen her changing. The problem was that 2 weeks had passed, and if Sloane was as smart as we thought, she'd already destroyed the evidence. But Nash said we should check with Graham's other cousin Emmett, who was 28 and had also been at the party. When Nash called him, Emmett confirmed Head seen Sloane go to her car multiple times during the party, which Head thought was weird at the time. He also remembered that Sloane had insisted on being near the drink station during setup, volunteering to help with beverage service, even though she normally avoided any kind of work at family events. We got a copy of the guest list from Nash and created a detailed timeline of when people had gotten sick. The first person reported feeling ill at 4:50 in the afternoon. By 5:15, 8 people were showing symptoms of alcohol poisoning. All of them had consumed punch from the main drink station. I pulled my credit card and bank statements going back 3 months to prove I hadn't purchased any alcohol in the weeks before the party. Lacey suggested contacting the caterer to ask about the alcohol supply, and when Julian called me back, he confirmed something crucial. The vodka bottles people got sick from weren't part of his service. Head noticed empty bottles in the trash that weren't his brand, and Head assumed my family had added extra alcohol to the party. Someone had brought external bottles to the venue and used them to spike the drinks. That someone was definitely not me. Nash connected me with one of Graham's ex-colleagues, a woman named Giselle who was 35. Giselle had been close friends with Graham before he got engaged, and Shed actually encouraged his relationship with Haley at first. But according to Giselle, Sloane had systematically frozen her out of Graham's life. Sloane had spread rumors that Giselle was mentally unstable and having an affair with a married colleague. The rumors were completely fabricated, but they damaged Giselle's reputation so badly that Shed felt forced to change jobs. Graham had believed his sister and distanced himself from Giselle entirely. When I spoke with Giselle on the phone, she warned me that Sloane didn't stop until she won, and that I needed to be prepared for her to escalate. Giselle gave me the names of 2 other people Sloane had targeted over the years, and when I contacted them, I heard similar stories. There was a clear pattern. Sloane identified people she perceived as threats, manufactured elaborate scenarios to discredit them, and used carefully constructed evidence to isolate her victims. By the time the truth emerged, if it ever did, the damage was already done. That's when Nash remembered something crucial. The venue my parents had rented the tent from also provided security cameras to protect their expensive equipment. We contacted the owner, a man named Curtis who was 52, and explained the situation. Curtis was sympathetic and gave us access to the security footage from the day of the party. There were hours of footage to review, and Lacey, Nash, and I spent an entire evening watching it. At timestamp 4:38 in the afternoon, a figure in a dress matching mine appeared near the drink station. The person kept their face deliberately angled away from the cameras, which was suspicious in itself. At timestamp 4:55, the same figure disappeared in the direction of the parking area. Then we found the gold. A different camera angle captured a woman with an auburn wig walking quickly to a dark sedan. The car was registered to Sloane, and Nash confirmed the license plate. The video clearly showed her removing the wig once she was in the car and changing clothes. For exactly 3 seconds, her face was fully visible. It was definitely Sloane. We had actual proof. Video evidence showing Sloane disguised as me, tampering with drinks, and then removing her disguise. I felt this rush of vindication mixed with rage. This woman had deliberately destroyed my life, torn apart my family, and nearly ruined my career, all because she didn't want her brother to marry someone she considered beneath him. But we also knew we had to be strategic about how we used this evidence. If we just sent it to my family, they might dismiss it or claim it was edited. We needed to present it in a way that couldn't be ignored or explained away. Nash suggested we approach Derek first, since he'd always been closest to me and might be most open to reconsidering. I was nervous about facing my brother after weeks of silence, but I knew Nash was right. Derek was the key to getting through to the rest of the family. We showed up at Derek's apartment unannounced on a Saturday morning. When he opened the door and saw me standing there with Nash, he looked angry and started to close the door. Nash stopped him and said he was Graham's cousin and that Derek needed to see something important. Derek's girlfriend Jasmine was there, and she actually convinced him to let us in. We sat in their living room, and I could feel Derek's hostility radiating off him. We showed him the security footage on Nash's laptop, walking him through the timeline step by step. We showed him the hospital records with timestamps proving it'd been 25 minutes away. We showed him the rental receipt from the costume shop where Sloane had obtained the wig. Derek watched in complete silence, but I could see his expression changing as the evidence piled up. Jasmine was the first to speak. She said she'd felt something was wrong about the whole story from the beginning, that the timing had never made sense. Derek admitted he'd questioned it privately but felt pressured by our parents to publicly condemn me. He pulled out his phone and showed me texts from our mother, messages where Patricia explicitly told him that if he supported me, he was betraying Haley. There was one text that said the family needed to be united against me or we'd lose Haley forever. Derek looked at me with tears in his eyes and apologized over and over. I broke down completely. Months of pain and isolation pouring out of me. Derek hugged me and said he should have trusted me, that he should have known I'd never do something like this. But then he warned me that getting our parents to believe the truth would be much harder. Our mother had bonded with Constance over wedding planning and had invested heavily in being part of Graham's prestigious family. Any accusation against Sloane would be seen as an attack on that relationship and on the future Patricia had envisioned for Haley. Derek arranged a family dinner under the pretense of clearing the air and moving forward. The location was our parents' house, the same place where they'd shut the door in my face weeks earlier. Patricia and Roger agreed to the meeting, though my mother made it clear she expected me to apologize. Haley and Graham were invited but declined, which stung but wasn't surprising. When I walked into my childhood home for the first time in over a month, my mother's face was cold and hostile. My father looked uncomfortable but willing to listen. Derek took the lead, explaining that he'd done some investigating and discovered information that changed everything. He pulled out his laptop and showed them the security footage. My mother watched with her arms crossed, her expression skeptical. My father leaned in closer, studying the screen carefully. When Derek showed them the clip of Sloane removing the wig in her car, my mother's face registered shock for just a moment before transforming into denial. She said the video could be of anyone, that you couldn't see clearly enough to be sure it was Sloane. I pointed out that Nash had confirmed the license plate matched Sloane's car, and that we had 3 seconds of clear footage showing her face. Patricia said Nash could be lying to help me, that maybe he had his own reasons for wanting to cause trouble for Sloane. Derek then showed them the hospital records and security timestamps proving he'd been nowhere near the party when the drinks were spiked. He showed them the rental receipt from the costume shop with Sloane's signature. He showed them statements from Giselle and the other people Sloane had targeted in the past, demonstrating a clear pattern of manipulation and sabotage. My father studied the evidence for a long time without speaking. My mother kept finding reasons to doubt everything we showed her. She said the rental receipt could be forged, that the hospital timestamps could be manipulated, that the people giving statements were strangers who could be lying. Derek lost his patience and raised his voice, asking our mother to actually look at the evidence instead of making excuses. He pointed out that the timeline made it physically impossible for me to have been in 2 places at once. My father finally spoke up and said the evidence was compelling, that the original photo's timeline didn't match the hospital records. But my mother stood up and left the room, and we could hear her and my father arguing in the kitchen. My father's voice said we needed to talk to Haley about this. My mother's voice said absolutely not, that the wedding was in 3 months and we couldn't upset things now. When Patricia came back into the living room, her face was set in hard lines. She said we needed to think about Haley's future and her relationship with Graham's family. She said making accusations against Sloane right now would destroy the wedding and potentially Haley's marriage before it even started. I realized with horror that my mother was choosing to ignore the truth because it was inconvenient. She'd rather let me stay accused and ostracized than risk her relationship with Constance or Haley's position in Graham's wealthy family. My father came back and sat down heavily. He wouldn't look at me. Derek was furious, asking our parents how they could possibly ignore what Wed'd shown them. My mother said Wed'd discussed this after the wedding, that timing was everything, and that I needed to be patient and let Haley have her special day without drama. After my mother left to go to the bedroom, my father pulled me aside. He looked exhausted and ashamed. He told me quietly that he believed me and that he was sorry for how Head treated me. But when I asked him to tell Haley the truth, he said my mother thought it was best to wait until after the wedding. I asked him if I was supposed to just stay cut off and branded as someone who sabotaged my own sister. He said it was complicated, that Graham's family was very important to Haley's future, and that we had to think about the bigger picture. I left my parents' house that night feeling emptier than when it arrived. Having proof meant nothing if people chose to ignore it. My father believed me but wouldn't act on it. My mother believed me but chose the lie anyway because it was more convenient. It'd been abandoned twice now, once based on false evidence and once despite real evidence, and I didn't know which hurt more. A week after the failed family meeting, I received a text from an unknown number that just said, "Drop this investigation, or it'll make things much worse." I knew immediately it was Sloane. She'd somehow found out that I was building a case against her, probably through Nash or maybe through some other connection, and she was threatening me. I showed the message to Lacey, and she insisted I file a police report, but I knew the cops wouldn't do anything about an ambiguous threat from an unknown number. 3 days after that text, I walked out to my car in my apartment building's parking lot and found the word liar scratched deep into the driver's side paint. The letters were huge, visible from across the lot. I filed a police report, but there were no security cameras in that section of the parking lot. The officer who took my statement said it was probably random vandalism and that I shouldn't take it personally, but I knew exactly who was responsible. My anxiety got so bad that Lacey insisted I stay at her house for a while. I was barely sleeping, jumping at every sound, convinced Sloane was watching me somehow. Then things escalated at work. I came in one morning to find my computer had been hacked overnight. Personal files were deleted, work projects were corrupted, and I'd lost weeks of design work. The IT department traced the IP address but said it had been routed through multiple proxies and they couldn't identify the source. Todd pulled me aside and told me gently that corporate was getting concerned about all the drama surrounding me. He didn't say I was in danger of losing my job, but the implication was clear. I needed to resolve this situation, or it was going to cost me my career on top of everything else. I seriously considered giving up, packing my bags, moving to a different city, and starting over somewhere nobody knew my name or my history. The fight felt impossible, and I was so tired. Then I got an email from Haley with the subject line, "We need to talk," and my heart nearly stopped. We agreed to meet at a park near our childhood neighborhood, somewhere neutral where we could talk privately. I arrived 20 minutes early because I was too nervous to wait at home. When Haley appeared, I barely recognized her. She'd always been slim, but now she looked almost gaunt. Her eyes had dark circles under them, and she moved like she was exhausted. We sat on a bench, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, Haley said that Derek had shown her the security footage. My heart started racing with hope. She said she didn't know what to believe anymore. Graham's family was adamant that the video was fake or manipulated. Sloane had apparently hired some expert who claimed the footage was doctored, though I knew that was a complete lie. Constance had threatened to withdraw all financial support for the wedding if Haley sided with our family over Graham's family. Haley started crying, and it was heartbreaking to watch. She said she felt like she was being pulled in 1,000 different directions and didn't know who she was anymore. Everyone wanted her to take their side, and no matter what she chose, she'd lose people she loved. She admitted that part of her had known something was wrong from the beginning, that she knew in her heart I would never sabotage her party. But Graham's family had been so certain, so unified in their conviction, and our mother had backed them up completely. Haley felt like she was going crazy, unable to trust her own judgment. I reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. We sat there holding hands like we used to when we were little kids, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe I'd get my sister back. But Haley also said she was scared, that if she believed me and confronted Sloane, the wedding might be called off, and Graham might choose his family over her. I told her I understood, even though part of me wanted to scream that she should choose truth over a wedding. But I could see how trapped she felt, and I couldn't hate her for being afraid. 2 days after meeting with Haley, I received a phone call that changed everything. A woman named Trina, who was 30 years old, said she worked at a costume rental shop and had information about Sloane. She explained that 3 days before the engagement party, Sloane had come in and rented an auburn wig that matched my hair color exactly, along with theatrical makeup and prosthetic pieces that could subtly alter someone's facial features. Sloane had paid in cash and insisted on no paper trail, which Trina thought was suspicious at the time. She'd kept the receipt in her personal files because something about the transaction felt wrong. Trina had recently seen Haley's engagement announcement in the local paper and recognized the family name. She said she felt guilty that she might have helped facilitate something harmful. I met with Trina at a coffee shop, and she gave me copies of everything. The receipt was dated exactly 4 days before the party and listed the specific wig color and style. This was concrete proof of premeditation. Sloane had planned the entire setup days in advance. Armed with the costume rental receipts, security footage, witness statements, hospital records, and timeline documentation, I knew we finally had enough evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. Derek, Nash, Lacey, and I decided on a direct approach. We requested a meeting with Haley and Graham at his apartment, without any other family members present. Graham was defensive at first, protective of his family, but he agreed to look at what we had. We presented everything systematically, walking them through each piece of evidence step by step. The costume rental receipt showing Sloane had acquired a wig matching my hair 4 days before the party. The security footage showing someone in my dress tampering with drinks after Eid left. The clear video of Sloane removing a wig in her car. The hospital records proving Eid been miles away. The statements from people Sloane had targeted in the past. The timeline that made it physically impossible for me to be in two places at once. Graham's face changed as he watched and listened. He called Nash aside for a private conversation, and I could see them talking intensely in the other room. When they came back, Graham looked devastated. He said he needed to confront Sloane directly. Haley was holding my hand so tightly her nails dug into my palm, and she kept apologizing over and over. I told her it was okay, that Sloane had fooled everyone because that was exactly what Shed designed her plan to do. Graham arranged for a confrontation at his parents' house the following day. He wanted everyone there, me, Derek, Haley, Nash, and our parents. Pierce and Constance needed to see the evidence too, and Sloane needed to be held accountable in front of the whole family. The gathering at Pierce and Constance's house felt like a trial. Their living room was massive and formal, filled with expensive furniture that made me afraid to sit down. When Sloane arrived and saw all of us there, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. Graham started speaking before she could ask questions. He presented the evidence calmly and methodically, like the lawyer he was. He showed her the security footage, the rental receipts, and the witness statements. Sloane's face remained completely neutral for most of it, and then she laughed. She said this was absolutely absurd, that we were really believing some conspiracy theory we'd concocted. Nash played the video, showing her removing the wig in the parking lot. Sloane said that could be anyone, that the video quality wasn't clear enough to be certain. That's when Trina walked in. Wed asked her to come as a surprise witness, and the look on Sloane's face when she saw her was priceless. Trina presented the rental agreement with Sloane's signature and the credit card receipt showing her purchase. Sloane's composure started to crack. She tried to claim Shed rented the wig for a costume party, but Graham pointed out the suspicious timing. Constance attempted to defend her daughter, saying Sloane would never do something so elaborate and cruel. But Pierce, who'd been silent up until that point, told his wife to let Sloane speak for herself. Derek then played the hospital security footage showing me checking in at 4:28 in the afternoon and remaining there until after 8. The timeline made Sloane's story impossible to maintain. Sloane's face transformed into something ugly as she realized she was cornered. She made one final desperate attempt to salvage things, claiming Shed been investigating me because she was suspicious of my behavior. She said Shed worn the disguise to observe me and see if it'd do something inappropriate at the party. Graham shut that down immediately, pointing out that Id left before the drinks were tampered with, and that her entire explanation made no logical sense. That's when Sloane exploded. She screamed that Haley didn't deserve Graham, that she was ordinary and came from an embarrassing family, and that Sloane had been trying to protect her brother from making a terrible mistake. She said I was beneath them all and that Shed done nothing wrong by exposing what kind of people we really were. The room went completely silent. Even Constance looked shocked at her daughter's venom. Graham's voice was ice cold when he told Sloane to get out. He said she wasn't welcome at his wedding and that he didn't want her in his life. Constance tried to protest, saying that Sloane was still her daughter and we couldn't expect her to choose between her children. But Pierce spoke up and said that Sloane had committed fraud, harassment, and had destroyed an innocent person's reputation and family relationships. He said she needed to leave and face the consequences of her actions. Sloane stormed out of the house, and Constance followed her, torn between her children but ultimately unable to abandon her daughter completely. The rest of us sat in heavy silence after they left. My mother, who'd been sitting rigid and quiet through the entire confrontation, finally broke down. She came over to where I was sitting and got down on her knees in front of me. She said Shed failed me in every possible way, that Shed chosen what was easy and comfortable over what was right. She admitted Shed been seduced by the idea of Haley marrying into a prestigious family, and hadn't wanted to believe that someone from such a good family could be so calculating and cruel. She said Shed let her own social ambitions blind her to the truth, and that she'd thrown away her daughter to protect a fantasy. My father stood behind her with tears running down his face, and when I looked at him, he just nodded in agreement with everything Patricia was saying. They both apologized, and while I couldn't say everything was forgiven immediately, it was a start. Haley wrapped her arms around me and asked how she could possibly make up for not believing me. I told her she already was by believing me now, and that we'd get through this together like sisters should. Graham apologized for his family and promised he'd make sure everyone who'd heard the false story heard the truth. He personally called his boss and explained what had really happened. He sent messages to his colleagues and family friends, clearing my name completely. Derek and Jasmine promised to help me rebuild my reputation with our extended family. My father sent a group message to all our relatives explaining that I'd been falsely accused and that Sloane had confessed. Some relatives apologized. Some never acknowledged they'd been wrong, but at least the truth was out there. 3 months later, I stood in my sister's bridal suite helping her get ready for her wedding. The ceremony was much smaller than originally planned. After everything that had happened, Haley and Graham decided they wanted something intimate and genuine rather than a big social spectacle. Pierce was there, but Constance had chosen to stay home with Sloane, unable to fully accept what her daughter had done. Graham was hurt by his mother's absence but respected her choice. As I helped Haley with her veil, she looked at me in the mirror and said, "She'd almost lost me over someone else's jealousy and manipulation." I told her the important thing was that we were here now, together, and that nothing would come between us again. The ceremony was beautiful and filled with people who genuinely loved them. When I gave my toast at the reception, I talked about resilience, about fighting for truth even when everyone doubts you, and about sisters who find their way back to each other. My mother and father were working on rebuilding trust with me, and we'd started family therapy to address the deeper issues in our relationships. It was slow and sometimes painful, but we were all committed to doing better. Derek and I were closer than we'd been in years. He'd proven himself when it really mattered, and I'd never forget that. Nash had become an unexpected friend, and had actually helped me restore my professional reputation by connecting me with some of his business contacts who needed design work. Lacey and her family were at the wedding too, and little Emma had completely healed from her broken arm. She caught the bouquet, which made everyone laugh. As I watched Haley and Graham dance their first dance as a married couple, I reflected on everything that had happened. Losing my family temporarily had taught me the difference between real love and obligation. I'd learned who truly had my back when everything fell apart. I'd discovered I was stronger than I thought I was. Most importantly, I'd stopped trying to earn my mother's approval or prove my worth to people who'd already decided what they thought of me. So let me ask you something, because I really want to know your thoughts on this. Have you ever been falsely accused of something and had people believe the lie instead of you? How did you handle it? Drop your story in the comments because I think we all need to know we're not alone in experiences like this. And if this story resonated with you at all, please hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel if you want to hear more stories about family drama, standing up for yourself, and finding your way through impossible situations. Share this video with anyone who's ever felt like their family chose someone else's version of events over the truth. I'm reading every single comment, and your support means everything to me. Thank you for listening to my story, and for believing me when so many people didn't. I hope you never have to go through what I went through, but if you do, I hope you remember that the truth eventually comes out, and the people who really love you will fight to find it. Stay strong out there, and remember that your worth isn't determined by people who refuse to see it. Take care of yourselves.